Most war movies lie to you. They show heroic charges, clean victories, and speeches about honor. But what if the real soldiers who fought in World War II said many of those films completely missed the truth? A handful of movies did something different. They showed fear, confusion, exhaustion, and the terrifying randomness of survival. Tonight we're looking at 12 World War II films veterans themselves called brutally accurate. And one of them was so realistic, some former soldiers couldn't finish watching it. The Thin Red Line, 1998. Most war films focus on action. The Thin Red Line focuses on the mind. Director Terrence Malick's film follows American soldiers fighting during the Battle of Guadalcanal in the Pacific. But instead of heroic spectacle, the story drifts inside the thoughts of exhausted infantrymen, trying to understand why they are there at all. Combat arrives suddenly and brutally. Machine gun fire erupts from hidden Japanese positions. Soldiers crawl through tall grass under blistering heat, never knowing where the next shot will come from. What many veterans recognized immediately was the film's psychological realism. War is not constant action. It is long stretches of waiting, fear, and confusion broken by seconds of terror. Characters question duty, morality, and survival while surrounded by indifferent jungle landscapes. The film rarely celebrates victory. Instead, it presents combat as something strange and disorienting, an experience that leaves soldiers feeling detached from the world they once knew. Flags of Our Fathers, 2006. Most war films celebrate heroes. Flags of Our Fathers examines what happens after the photographs are taken. Directed by Clint Eastwood, the film tells the story behind the famous image of American Marines raising the flag on Iwo Jima. The photograph became one of the most recognizable images of the war, transforming the soldiers involved into national symbols overnight. But the reality was far more complicated. Several of the men in the photograph were killed shortly afterward in the same brutal battle. The survivors were sent back to the United States to promote war bonds, touring the country while still haunted by what they had experienced. Veterans often praise the film for showing the uncomfortable distance between public heroism and battlefield reality. The Marines themselves knew the truth, but thousands of soldiers had died on Iwo Jima. The photograph captured only one moment among countless acts of sacrifice. The film quietly asks a disturbing question. How do you celebrate victory when so many of the people who earned it never came home? Enemy at the Gates, 2001. The Battle of Stalingrad remains one of the most brutal conflicts of the Second World War. Enemy at the Gates places viewers directly into that nightmare. The film follows Soviet sniper Vasily Zaitsev as he fights German forces inside the ruined city. But what veterans and historians often discuss most is the opening sequence. New Soviet recruits are rushed across the Volga River under artillery fire. Many are given rifles, others receive only ammunition. Their orders are simple: pick up a weapon from a fallen soldier. The chaotic charge into German machine gun fire captures the terrifying desperation of the Eastern Front. Thousands of soldiers were thrown into combat with minimal training as commanders struggled to hold the collapsing front line. The film later focuses on a tense sniper duel, but the early scenes leave the strongest impression. War here is not glorious strategy. It is exhausted soldiers hiding inside shattered buildings, moving through frozen rubble, and waiting for the next shot to echo through the ruined city. The environment itself feels hostile. Stalingrad becomes less like a battlefield, and more like a collapsing world, where survival lasts only moment to moment. Tora, 1970. Many war movies exaggerate events for drama. Tora takes the opposite approach. The film reconstructs the attack on Pearl Harbor with remarkable attention to historical detail. Instead of focusing on a single hero, the story moves between Japanese and American commanders as both sides approach the moment that would pull the United States into the war. What impressed many veterans and historians was the film's restraint. There are no exaggerated speeches or fictional rescue missions. Instead, the story unfolds like a slow-moving disaster. Japanese pilots prepare for the strike, while American radar operators struggle to interpret confusing signals that might have revealed the incoming attack. Miscommunication spreads quietly across the command structure. Warnings arrive too late. When the attack finally begins, the destruction feels sudden and overwhelming. Aircraft roar over the harbor, and battleships erupt into explosions. Sailors scramble to respond as the base collapses into chaos. The film presents the attack almost like a documentary reconstruction. The result is unsettling, because the disaster doesn't feel cinematic. It feels inevitable. A chain of small failures and missed signals building toward a moment when history changes in a matter of minutes. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. Operation Market Garden was supposed to end the war quickly. Instead, it became one of the Allies' most costly and ambitious failures. A Bridge Too Far tells the story of the massive airborne assault launched by Allied forces in September 1944, known as Operation Market Garden. The plan called for thousands of paratroopers to capture a chain of critical bridges across the Netherlands. If successful, the Allied ground forces could drive directly into Germany and potentially bring the war in Europe to an early conclusion. On paper, the strategy looked brilliant. Airborne divisions would drop behind enemy lines, seize the bridges, and hold them until advancing armored units arrived. But in reality, the operation collapsed under the weight of overconfidence and flawed intelligence. The film follows multiple Allied units as the mission slowly unravels. Paratroopers from divisions such as the 101st Airborne Division and the 1st Airborne Division land, far from their intended targets. At the same time, unexpected German armored divisions appear in the area. Forces Allied commanders believed had already retreated. Communication begins to collapse. Supply lines struggle to keep up. Reinforcements fail to arrive in time. In nowhere is the disaster more visible than at the bridge in Arnhem. British paratroopers defending the bridge gradually realize they have been left isolated deep behind enemy lines with little hope of relief. Veterans and historians often praise the film for its honesty. Instead of portraying war as a chain of heroic victories, it shows how even carefully designed operations can disintegrate once combat begins. By the time Allied commanders admit the plan has failed, thousands of soldiers have already been lost. The bridge meant to open the road into Germany became a lasting symbol of how quickly confidence can collapse in war. The Gray Zone, 2001. Most war films avoid one of the darkest and most disturbing aspects of the Second World War. The Gray Zone confronts it directly. The story takes place inside Auschwitz and focuses on a group of prisoners known as Sonderkommando. These men were forced by the Nazis to assist in the operation of the gas chambers and crematoriums. Their task was horrifying. They guided victims into the chambers under false promises of safety. After the gas was released, they were ordered to remove the bodies, search them for valuables, and carry them to massive furnaces where the remains were burned. The film refuses to soften this reality. Instead, it explores the impossible moral position these prisoners faced. Refusing to cooperate meant immediate execution. Obeying orders meant participating in the machinery of extermination created by Nazi Germany. Historians and viewers often describe the film as one of the most disturbing portrayals of the Holocaust ever placed on screen. There are no heroic rescue missions, no dramatic victories, only the grim understanding that survival inside such a system forced people into choices that defied normal moral boundaries. Eventually, the prisoners secretly organize a desperate uprising within the camp, but even that rebellion carries a tragic certainty. They know the revolt cannot truly succeed. The guards will eventually crush it. At best, the uprising might damage part of the extermination machinery, or allow a few prisoners to escape long enough to tell the world what happened. The film leaves viewers with a haunting realization. In places like Auschwitz, survival sometimes meant existing in a terrible gray space between resistance and destruction. Stalingrad, 1993. German cinema rarely portrayed the Eastern Front with such brutal honesty. Stalingrad follows a group of German soldiers sent into one of the deadliest battles of the Second World War, Battle of Stalingrad. At first, the soldiers believe they are marching toward victory. Like many troops sent east by Nazi Germany, they expect a swift campaign against a weakening enemy. But as the battle drags on, that illusion collapses. Food becomes scarce. Winter temperatures plunge far below freezing. Ammunition runs dangerously low, while Soviet forces slowly tighten their encirclement around the trapped German Sixth Army. The film focuses on the slow physical and psychological destruction of the soldiers. Frostbite spreads through the ranks. as exhausted men wander through ruined buildings, searching for scraps of food. Wounded soldiers are abandoned because evacuation is impossible. Every day becomes a struggle simply to remain alive. What many veterans and historians recognized in the film was its refusal to glorify combat. War here is not heroic. It is hunger, exhaustion, and fear, slowly grinding soldiers down until survival becomes the only remaining objective. Meanwhile, orders from distant commanders grow increasingly disconnected from the reality on the ground. Even when defeat becomes obvious, soldiers are instructed to keep fighting. By the end of the film, the battlefield no longer feels like a place of strategy or ideology. It becomes something colder and more terrifying. A frozen wasteland where thousands of men wait for an end that may never come. Come and See, 1985. Few war films are as psychologically devastating as Come and See. Directed by Ilem Klimov, in the film follows a Belarusian teenager named Floria who joins Soviet partisan fighters during the Nazi occupation of Eastern Europe and Belarus. At the beginning, Floria believes war will be an adventure. Like many young people swept into the conflict, he imagines heroism, bravery, and the excitement of fighting an enemy. That illusion disappears almost immediately. As he travels through the countryside with the partisans, Floria begins witnessing the true face of the war on the Eastern Front. Villages lie in ruins, civilians flee through forests. Entire communities are wiped out in brutal retaliation against resistance fighters by forces of Nazi Germany. Director Klimov presents these events almost entirely through the perspective of the young boy. After one explosion, Floria is temporarily deafened. The soundtrack becomes muffled, or placing the audience inside his disoriented state of mind. The camera repeatedly lingers on his face as fear, shock, and exhaustion slowly transform his expression. By the end of the film, the cheerful teenager seen at the beginning has aged emotionally beyond recognition. Veterans and historians often describe the film as one of the most honest portrayals of how war destroys not only soldiers, but entire civilian populations. There are few traditional battle scenes. Instead, the horror unfolds through scattered encounters with violence that feels sudden and uncontrollable. One infamous sequence shows villagers forced into a wooden church before it is burned alive, one of the most disturbing scenes ever captured on film. The title itself carries a grim message. Now is Come and See, not an invitation to celebrate war, but a warning to witness its darkest consequences. Das Boot, 1981. Life inside a German U-boat was unlike almost any other experience in the war. Das Boot places viewers inside that suffocating world. The film follows the crew of submarine U-96 as it patrols the Atlantic Ocean hunting Allied convoys. At first, the sailors treat the mission with excitement, joking about the dangers and competing for small comforts aboard the cramped vessel. But as the patrol continues, the reality of submarine warfare emerges. The interior of the submarine becomes a steel coffin. Crew members sleep in narrow bunks between torpedoes. Diesel fumes fill the air. The constant creaking of the hull reminds everyone how fragile the vessel is beneath the crushing pressure of the ocean. When Allied destroyers detect the submarine, the tension becomes unbearable. Depth charges explode above the vessel as the crew waits silently, hoping the hull will not rupture. Veterans of submarine warfare often praise the film's realism. The terror comes not from visible enemies, but from the environment itself. The ocean becomes the true adversary. Every creak of metal suggests the submarine could implode at any moment. By the end of the patrol, the exhausted crew understands something simple. In submarine warfare, survival often depended less on skill and more on luck. Letters from Iwo Jima, 2006. Most World War II films portray the conflict from the Allied perspective. Letters from Iwo Jima tells the story from the other side. Directed by Clint Eastwood, the film explores the Japanese defense of the island of Iwo Jima before American forces landed in 1945. The soldiers stationed there understood something their commanders would not openly admit. They were expected to die. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi orders the construction of an elaborate network of tunnels and bunkers beneath the island, knowing the Japanese army cannot match the overwhelming firepower of the approaching American invasion. Instead of focusing on ideology, the film examines the personal lives of the soldiers defending the island. Many are young conscripts who left families behind. They write letters home describing hopes, fears, and quiet regrets. As American forces land on the beaches, the battle becomes a slow collapse of defensive positions. Supplies disappear, ammunition runs low. The soldiers face a terrible decision between surrender and suicide. Veterans who later watched the film often commented on its humanity. It refuses to portray the Japanese soldiers as faceless enemies. Instead, it reveals a tragic reality of war. On both sides of the battlefield, most soldiers were simply trying to survive a conflict far larger than themselves. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. When Saving Private Ryan premiered in 1998, many World War II veterans found the opening sequence almost impossible to watch. The film begins during the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, better known as D-Day. Within moments, viewers are placed directly inside the terrifying chaos of the landing at Omaha Beach. For nearly 20 minutes, the camera remains in the middle of the assault. Landing craft doors slam open. Its band soldiers stepping into the water are immediately struck by German machine gun fire. Bodies collapse into the surf as waves turn red around them. Medics crawl across the sand trying desperately to treat wounded men, while artillery shells explode nearby, throwing dirt and debris into the air. Director Steven Spielberg filmed the sequence using handheld cameras, desaturated colors, and harsh sound design that captures the deafening chaos of the battlefield. The result feels less like traditional cinema and more like a documentary capturing raw survival. Many veterans later described the opening as the most realistic portrayal of combat they had ever seen on screen. Some reportedly left theaters because the images triggered vivid memories of the actual landing. But the story does not end with the invasion. The film follows Captain John Miller and his squad as they move through occupied France on an unusual mission. Their task is to locate a single paratrooper, Private James Ryan, whose brothers have all been killed in combat. The mission raises uncomfortable questions. Is risking multiple soldiers' lives worth saving one man? What obligations do soldiers carry towards civilians trapped in the war? The film refuses to provide simple answers. Instead, it presents war as a relentless test of endurance where bravery exists alongside fear, confusion, and doubt, an honesty that many veterans recognized immediately. Band of Brothers, 2001. Although technically a television miniseries, Band of Brothers is often considered one of the most authentic portrayals of World War II ever filmed. Produced by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, the series follows the soldiers of Easy Company, part of the 101st Airborne Division, from their intense training in the United States to the final months of the war in Europe. What made the series stand apart from most war dramas was its deep commitment to accuracy and personal testimony. Each episode begins with interviews from the real veterans who served in Easy Company. Their reflections, quiet, reflective, and sometimes emotional, frame the story that unfolds on screen. Instead of fictionalized heroics, the series builds its narrative directly from the memories of the men who lived through the events. The story moves through some of the most pivotal moments of the war. The soldiers parachute into Normandy during the chaos of D-Day, where night drops scatter them across unfamiliar countryside filled with enemy forces. Units lose contact with each other. Small groups of paratroopers must improvise their way through darkness and confusion while trying to regroup. Later episodes shift to the brutal winter fighting during the Battle of the Bulge. Easy Company defends frozen forest positions with limited supplies while surrounded by German troops. Soldiers suffer from exhaustion, freezing temperatures, and constant artillery bombardment. But what veterans often praised most about Band of Brothers were the small details. The way soldiers joked to relieve tension, the silence before an attack, the exhaustion after endless marches through mud and snow, the quiet fear that appeared on faces moments before combat began. These details gave the series a powerful sense of realism rarely seen in war films. The story never suggests that war was glorious. Instead, it shows how friendships formed under extreme pressure became lifelines. Men who trained together slowly disappear from the ranks as casualties mount. Survivors carry the memory of those losses long after the battle's end. By the final episode, the series delivers a quiet truth. World War II was not only fought by armies or commanders, it was endured day by ordinary soldiers, young men forced into extraordinary circumstances, whose lives were permanently shaped by what they witnessed on the battlefield. War movies often promise heroism, but the films on this list reveal something far closer to the truth: fear, exhaustion, moral confusion, and the terrible cost of survival. These are the stories many real veterans recognized as painfully accurate. And once you've seen war through their eyes, the myth of glorious combat becomes much harder to believe.